The fire is already burning. Wood snaps. Men are shouting. Something heavy crashes to the ground. Someone is screaming a name, but it's drowned out by the wind. Footsteps pound across stone. A hand slips. A body hits the ground hard. Steel flashes in the dark. Not clean. Not heroic. Messy, panicked, desperate. Orders are being shouted, but no one is listening anymore. Smoke fills the air. Eyes burn. Lungs tighten. Someone drops their shield. Another man turns the wrong way and vanishes into the black. There is no formation now. No plan. Only survival. A voice yells from the darkness, sharp, commanding, but it's already too late. The men scatter anyway. They always do when fear takes over. Something moves just beyond the firelight. You can hear breathing. Slow, controlled. Not a monster. Not a god. A man. Someone whispers, "He said this would happen." The firelight flickers and suddenly the camp feels exposed. Fragile, temporary. A scream cuts off mid-sound. Silence follows, thick, unnatural. No one knows how many are left. No one knows who's still alive. And somewhere in the darkness, the man who led them here is still standing. Not singing. Not boasting. Just watching. And the question that no one dares to ask hangs in the air. Was this ever meant to be a victory? To understand the story behind Odysseus, we must step away from poetry and into the harsh reality of the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, a time when war was not glorious but constant. The Eastern Mediterranean was unstable. Kingdoms rose and collapsed within generations. Trade routes connected distant lands, but they also carried conflict. Armies moved by sea as often as by land, and coastal cities lived under the constant threat of sudden attack. This was the world of the Mycenaeans, warrior kings ruling from fortified palaces, bound by loyalty, fear, and ambition. Power came from violence, and survival depended on discipline. The Trojan War, if it occurred as remembered, was not a single dramatic siege. It was likely a long series of raids, counter-raids, alliances, betrayals, and brutal stalemates stretching across years. Battles were small but relentless. Camps were vulnerable, supply lines fragile. A single mistake could doom an entire force. Leadership mattered more than strength. A commander who hesitated lost men. A commander who misjudged terrain lost everything. This was not the age of shining heroes. It was an age of scarcity, where hunger, exhaustion, and fear shaped decisions more than honor. Odysseus, if he existed, would not have been remembered for strength. He would have survived because he understood people, their weaknesses, their fear, their need to believe in stories. Warfare in this era relied heavily on deception. Night attacks, false retreats, psychological pressure. A battle was often decided before swords ever crossed. Silence could be deadlier than noise. Waiting more dangerous than fighting. And the sea, unpredictable, violent, and unforgiving, was both a highway and a grave. This was the environment that created the legend. But legends soften what history sharpens. And what followed would test every rule of war these men believed in. Odysseus does not enter history as a hero. He enters as a commander. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most admired, but the one others watched carefully. He trained his men to move quietly, to obey without questioning, to wait longer than was comfortable. His camp ran differently, less celebration, fewer speeches. Every day followed a strict routine. Weapons checked at dawn, formations drilled in silence, watches rotated without complaint. Mistakes were corrected immediately. Repeated mistakes were punished. Not cruelly, but publicly. Morale was controlled, not encouraged. Fear was acknowledged, not dismissed. At night, while others slept, Odysseus walked the perimeter. He listened more than he spoke. He memorized terrain. He noted how men behaved when tired, when angry, when bored. His soldiers respected him, but they did not relax around him, because he never promised glory, only survival. Rules were absolute. Leave formation without orders, punishment. Speak out of turn, punishment. Act independently, punishment. And yet when danger came, his men followed him. Not because they loved him, but because he had kept them alive before. What they did not know, what no one knew, was how far he was willing to go to do it again. The first hints were subtle, almost easy to miss. A scout failed to return on the second morning. Not unusual, there had been misses before, but the delay stretched into hours. Whispers started among the men. Questions, half-formed, that no one dared to speak aloud. Odysseus did not react. His eyes, sharp and cold, scanned the horizon as if he already knew something no one else could see. Orders continued as usual. Drills, rotations, and inspection marches, but an undercurrent of tension began to grow. The second night brought more unsettling signs. Fires were burning where they shouldn't have been. Some signals went unanswered. Messengers returned shaking, unable to explain what had silenced the camp. Whispers of shadows moving along the cliffs circulated quietly, dismissed as tricks of the torchlight. Yet something felt off. The men could sense it, a subtle disturbance in the rhythm of their world. Birds that usually circled lazily over the shore had vanished. Animals behaved strangely. Deer froze at the edge of the tree line. Wolves were silent. The sea, normally restless even at night, lay unnervingly calm like glass. Men began to speak of strange noises in the dark. Footsteps behind them when no one was there. Murmurs that seemed to echo familiar voices, but distorted. Names they recognized whispered in places where no one could be. Some said they felt watched. Others claimed a sense of being drawn toward the forest, a compulsion that made no sense. Odysseus noticed. He observed but said nothing. His routine remained the same, yet the intensity of his scrutiny increased. Orders became clipped, movements restricted. Weapons were never far from the hand. Watches were extended. Sleep became fragmented. A soldier swore he heard someone walking behind him while he patrolled the perimeter. When he turned, no one was there, but footprints led toward the center of the camp and then abruptly stopped, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Another claimed that a torchlight flickered in the distance, too far away to belong to their own watch. But when the men investigated, the light was gone. Nothing remained. Even the environment seemed to conspire. Fog crept into the camp during the early morning hours, unnaturally thick, muffling sound and disorienting the men. Supplies disappeared, tools misplaced. Nothing violent, nothing immediately threatening, but a creeping sense of unease spread through the ranks. Every small anomaly amplified anxiety. The men began avoiding the outer edges of the camp. Paths that had been safe for weeks were suddenly approached with hesitation. Murmurs of "Did you hear that?" and "Did you see it?" became common. Some tried to laugh it off, but the laughter rang hollow. And then came the silence. Not a complete silence, too unnatural for that, but a lack of the usual background noise. No waves crashing, no birds, no distant voices from other camps. The absence of sound carried a weight the men could feel in their bones. Even Odysseus, usually unfazed, was quieter now, moving deliberately, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. No one spoke of what they feared. Not yet. They were soldiers. Fear was tolerated only so far as it did not break discipline. Yet in the dark, in the spaces between orders, every man felt it, a growing, almost tangible anticipation. Something was coming, something they could neither name nor predict. And the strangest part of all the warning signs, the missed signals, the odd behavior of nature, the whispers in the dark, was that none of it explained why it had begun. No reason, no enemy visible, no betrayal discovered, only unease multiplying like a slow poison. The first true test had not yet arrived, but the signs were unmistakable. Something was shifting, and when it finally struck, no one would be ready. The night began like any other. A low wind swept through the camp, carrying the faint scent of salt and smoke. Torches flickered against the darkness, casting dancing shadows over the tents and wooden palisades. Men huddled around small fires, whispering quietly, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over the camp in the past days. And then it began. First, a sudden, sharp noise, a wooden plank snapping under weight. At first, it could have been mistaken for someone tripping, but it was followed immediately by the sound of hurried footsteps, too many, too fast, converging from multiple directions. A shout cut through the night, muffled by the fog rolling in from the cliffs. Men scrambled, unsure whether to grab weapons or flee. Torches were lifted, revealing flashes of movement, shadows darting between tents, figures moving too quickly to be human in the fading light. Orders were shouted. Conflicting commands overlapped. Confusion took hold almost instantly. Odysseus moved like water through the chaos. His voice rose above the tumult, sharp and commanding, cutting through panic. Form up, watch the flanks. Some obeyed, some did not. Some froze entirely, paralyzed by fear. A sudden clang, metal on metal, echoed across the camp. Somewhere a crate tipped over, spilling supplies into the sand. Men tripped over each other. Dogs barked and whined, trying to understand what was happening. The firelight wavered, throwing grotesque shapes against the tents. There was shouting from the perimeter. A gate that had been secured moments before now swung wide, hitting a post with a crash. Someone tried to close it, but the wind caught it, swinging it back. The sequence of events spiraled faster than anyone could comprehend. A soldier ran blindly into the wrong path, tripping over a tent rope, disappearing into the fog. Another fell into the shallow surf along the edge of the camp. Someone called a name, maybe a friend, maybe a commanding officer, but the voice was swallowed instantly by the night. Odysseus barked instructions, but even he was stretched thin. Signals failed. Messengers collided. Conflicting reports reached him from the flanks. The enemy, or whatever it was, had arrived with speed and precision. And yet no one could see it. Men swore they glimpsed figures moving beyond the firelight. Dark, silent, almost unreal. Nothing human and yet unmistakably alive. A faint whistle, the sound of a weapon shifting, a low thud, and then nothing. The chaos escalated. Supplies were abandoned, fires left unattended, tents collapsed. Confusion spread like wildfire. Some men froze in place. Others ran blindly, bumping into their own comrades. The fog clung to everything, distorting shapes, swallowing movement. Time fractured, moments stretched, orders repeated, shouts overlapped. A soldier tried to regroup a group of men at the center, only to find half of them gone. One by one, the watches disappeared into the night, their fates unknown. Odysseus moved with deliberate precision, directing those who remained. Every decision mattered. Every hesitation risked disaster, but even he could not account for the forces working against them. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. No shouting, no footsteps, no movement beyond the flickering torchlight. Silence, thick and unnatural, blanketed the camp. Men froze, searching the darkness with wide eyes. The fog remained heavy and unmoving. Supplies were scattered. Fires had burned down. Footsteps were gone. Voices that had screamed a moment before were now absent. Some tried to call out to find comrades to verify who was alive. Their own voices sounded strange, alien against the oppressive quiet. Answers did not come. There was no enemy to face, no visible threat, only absence. Odysseus stood in the center, torch in hand, surveying the wreckage of what had moments ago been a functioning camp. Men stared at him for guidance, but no words could explain what had just occurred. Some simply could not process it. Others whispered that they had seen figures vanish into thin air, that shadows had moved independently, that friends had disappeared as if swallowed by the earth. The first light of dawn brought no clarity. The fog lingered stubbornly, hiding tracks and footprints. Those who had vanished were nowhere to be found. Nothing in the terrain, the shore, or the tents suggested what had happened. Even the animals avoided the camp, skittish and silent. Odysseus called roll. Names went unanswered. Confusion and fear mingled with exhaustion. Men stared at him, their faces pale, eyes wide. He said nothing that could reassure them, nothing that could explain what had transpired. He only ordered what could be done: assess the camp, search for the missing, report the situation. Yet deep down, everyone knew that what happened that night could not be reconstructed. It could not be predicted. It could not be fully understood. Something had entered their world. Something had altered it. And for those who remained, for those who survived, the memory of that night would linger, an unshakable tension, a question without answer, a shadow of fear that no dawn could fully banish. The incident had ended, or at least appeared to. But for Odysseus and his men, the repercussions had just begun. Dawn brought clarity, but no answers. The fog lingered stubbornly over the camp, clinging to tents, scattered supplies, and the footprints that disappeared into the sand as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Those who remained moved cautiously, scanning every shadow, listening for the faintest hint of sound. The silence was deafening. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir. Odysseus gathered the surviving men. They were few, faces pale, voices unsteady. Some refused to speak. Some whispered rumors of figures vanishing, of shadows moving against the light. He listened, nodding, but offered no explanations. Words, he knew, could not account for what had happened. Search parties were organized. Small groups fanned out along the cliffs, through the woods, and along the shoreline. They checked every cave, every crag, every hollow where a man could hide or be trapped. Nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no tracks that could be followed beyond the immediate camp. Only the faint impressions of footsteps that ended abruptly, as if those who walked them had simply ceased to exist. Reports came back fragmented, conflicting. One group swore they heard whispers in the trees. Another insisted a torchlight had moved in the distance but vanished when approached. Someone claimed to have glimpsed a familiar face standing on the cliffs, starring, then disappearing into the mist. Each account contradicted the last, and none could be verified. Odysseus inspected the perimeter himself, moving with deliberate caution. He noted the disarray, the overturned supplies, the burnt patches of sand where small fires had gone out too quickly. He checked the shoreline where men had fallen into the surf, but even there, evidence had been erased. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Only the smooth sand and the relentless sea. Back at the central camp, interrogations began. Soldiers were questioned one by one. Each described different sequences of events. Some insisted they had seen enemy forces, others swore the chaos had come from within. Stories of shadows, of movement, of voices were recorded, but each contradicted the others. The reports were filed, then quickly sent up the chain of command. Oddly, some of the pages never returned. Some lines were crossed out, names erased. Official confusion only deepened. Rumors spread. Men began to question what had happened. Had it been an ambush, a trick, a curse? Or had they imagined it all in the oppressive fog of fear? No one dared speak openly, but glances, gestures, and unspoken fears filled the camp. Odysseus remained calm yet distant. His gaze swept constantly, noting the smallest twitch of a hand, the faintest hesitation in a step. He maintained strict discipline, though no words could undo what had occurred. Every surviving soldier was accounted for. Yet the absence of so many names loomed larger than the presence of the living. Official reports reflected uncertainty. Timelines conflicted. Witness statements were partial, sometimes impossible to reconcile. Some files went missing entirely, erased or withheld. It was as if the night had left a void not only in the camp but in the historical record itself. Military authorities sent additional patrols. Searches extended beyond the immediate area, but no clue emerged. Nature itself seemed to conspire. Footprints vanished, tracks were washed away by tide or wind, animals avoided the area entirely. The event had left no tangible trace. And yet everyone who survived knew something unexplainable had occurred. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with the memory of that night. Questions hung unanswered. The men remained on edge, reluctant to speak, reluctant to rest. The unknown had taken something from them, something that could never be retrieved. Odysseus made no false promises. He issued orders, maintained structure, and reminded his men that the mission had to continue. But even he carried the weight of uncertainty. He understood that what had happened was bigger than anyone could account for, bigger than any enemy or strategy, bigger than the myths that would one day tell a story about cunning, survival, and heroism. The search ended officially with no resolution, no explanation, no enemy captured, no bodies recovered. The incident was logged as an unfortunate event, anomalous but ultimately unresolved. And so the men returned to their routines, haunted by what they could not name. Reports suggested normalcy. Orders restored discipline. Yet in the quiet moments when no one watched, the memory of the chaos, the disappearance, and the inexplicable silence remained. Something had happened that night, something no report could capture, something no witness could fully explain. And those who survived knew, deep down, that what they experienced would never be truly understood. The official record was silent on what truly occurred. But Odysseus and his men carried the unspoken truth. Events had transpired beyond comprehension, beyond prediction, beyond history itself. The night's events left more questions than answers. In the weeks that followed, whispers circulated through surviving men, officers, and scribes. Some were dismissed as fear-driven imagination. Others were recorded carefully, yet never officially acknowledged. The first theory was the simplest: an ambush. Many historians and strategists considered that Odysseus's camp had been attacked by a hidden enemy force, perhaps rivals from a neighboring kingdom, perhaps pirates skilled in night raids. According to this explanation, the confusion, disappearing men, and chaos could all be explained by surprise, speed, and terror. It had the merit of logic, and yet nothing in the landscape supported it. No bodies were found, no enemy footprints, no weapons left behind. Even Odysseus's most loyal scouts, trained to read every trace in the sand, returned with nothing. The evidence contradicted the theory. An ambush should leave proof, but here there was none. The second theory suggested betrayal, from within. Perhaps someone in the camp had deliberately sabotaged their defenses, let fear into the ranks, or misled men at a critical moment. This notion gained traction because the event seemed impossible to outsiders, yet those inside the camp knew that chaos can emerge from the smallest act of disloyalty. But who and why? Records hint at disagreements, whispered grievances, and even secret allegiances, but none were proven. Names were erased from official logs. Witnesses, when pressed, often became silent. Evidence of treachery existed only in implication, not in proof. A third theory was darker: calculated sacrifice. Some historians speculated that Odysseus, or another commander, had intentionally placed men in a position to vanish, to distract, to serve a larger purpose. Perhaps the chaos was a tactic, a grim strategy designed to protect a larger operation or deceive a more dangerous enemy. It is chilling to consider. And yet, even here, the evidence is contradictory. If a plan existed, it was executed in ways that defy logic and expectations. Survivors reported not orders but confusion. If there was intent, it was obscured by fear, chance, and the inexplicable events of the night. Finally, there was a fourth theory, one seldom recorded. In hushed conversations among the oldest and quietest veterans, It was suggested that the incident transcended the normal world, that what the men experienced was not solely physical, not merely tactical, not fully explainable by human action. Figures appeared and disappeared. Footsteps vanished. Sounds emerged from nowhere. And no one has ever recorded the full detail of what happened. Some survivors claimed it was something beyond comprehension, something that could not survive the scrutiny of the written word. Each theory explained fragments. None explained the whole. Documents were incomplete. Logs were missing. Names crossed out. Witnesses were silenced, either voluntarily in fear or by orders from above. And yet the stories persisted. In taverns, in whispers, in the retelling of myths, fragments of truth survived. Odysseus himself never commented. To the outside world, he remained the cunning commander, the clever strategist, the man who survived impossible circumstances. But the men who served under him knew something different. They knew that survival sometimes comes at a cost too obscure to measure. The real story, the full truth, remains hidden, and perhaps it always will. Every theory carries a shadow of doubt. Every possibility is contradicted by some fragment of evidence, some erased page, some memory too faint or too terrifying to recount. And so we are left with questions. Questions that may never be answered. Questions that may in fact be unanswerable. The theories, the silences, the missing records, they all point to the same conclusion. History remembers what survives, not what truly occurred. And for the men who witnessed the events, the truth exists somewhere between what can be explained and what must remain a secret. History remembers Odysseus as clever, resourceful, a man favored by fate whose mind outwitted enemies and whose cunning ensured survival. But history is written by those who return. The men who vanished that night, whether through ambush, betrayal, strategy, or something beyond understanding, left no testimony. They left no trace. Their absence became a silent echo in the record, an emptiness disguised as anomaly. The truth remained buried, not necessarily because it could not be known, but because revealing it would dismantle the story everyone wanted to believe. The legend of Odysseus relies on clarity, on heroism, on a journey with challenges and triumphs neatly recorded. Reality, however, is never so tidy. Those who survived carried the memory in their minds, in whispers, in stolen glances. They remembered what they could never fully articulate. And in that memory, the story took a different shape, one of uncertainty, fear, and impossible questions. We may never know what truly occurred that night, which theory, if any, is accurate, whether survival required cunning, chance, or something far stranger. But perhaps that is the point. Some truths are too dangerous to fully uncover. Some events are too profound, too inexplicable to exist in the light of official records. And so the question lingers. Was Odysseus a hero who survived impossible odds? Or a man who understood that survival always demands a price no one else can see? We may never answer it. Yet the mystery endures, waiting for each of us to consider what lies beyond the myths, beyond the stories, beyond the history we are allowed to read. If you have a theory, no matter how strange, share it in the comments, because sometimes the only way to approach truth is through the questions we dare to ask.